Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. My name is Andrej Matišak, and I work as the Deputy Head of Foreign Desk in Slovak Daily Pravda, which, by the way, means truth, and it's not Russian Pravda. Are Russia, China, and Donald Trump's America global disruptors? And what can the EU do about it? And how to live in a world full of anxiety, where drones fly over our heads, we feel economic pressure, and the wars are nearby. Join me as I speak with Pavel Svoboda, Senior Visiting Fellow and Co-Director of the Brussels Economic Security Forum at the European Policy Center. He was Deputy Head and Head of Research of the European Political Strategy Center at the European Commission. He is a member of a European Commission's expert group on the economic and societal impact of research and innovation. Our interview took place at the Europe Future Forum in Warsaw. Listen to our conversation. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Coffee. For the link, see also a description of this episode. And now, up to the new debate. Well, of course, I want to talk first of all about economic security, but let me maybe start with a little bit more philosophical question. We are here in Warsaw, staying in Warsaw. My mom just called me in the morning that, are you okay? There were drones in Warsaw. And I think when you talk to people around the world and in Europe, there is anxiety. People feel anxiety, economic pressure, wars around the world and very nearby. And a lot of other things, the new technology, disrupting technologies, people are using them, but they're not sure how to use them sometimes and so on. So how do you feel about this? Do you feel anxiety? Do you feel something like, something is changing in the world?
We're definitely seeing new boundaries being passed, because a drone attack from a few days ago is something unprecedented, right? It is direct interference in the airspace of a NATO country, right? So I think we had assumed for a long time that events like this would not be possible, would not be likely. Now we have to learn to live with them. And it's hard, right? It's hard at the individual level. A lot of people are concerned. It's hard also at the policy level because you are chasing a technological development which continues to improve and transmorph as we speak. The drone technology is probably an area where we have seen more spectacular improvements in the last few years. A lot of this driven by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Ukraine's defense. But now I think we are seeing a new normal by means of which these types of intrusions will be our bread and butter in Europe across the board. Poland and Romania now with the drones. No, it could be anybody else at any time. Cyber security attacks are also extremely widespread. We have to learn how to live with them. On the one hand, we need to make sure that they are not considered acceptable either, because in the normative area, we cannot allow for the shifting of the marker towards a situation where behavior like this would be acceptable, right? So that has to be very clear.
So maybe how to respond to this then?
We have to respond in a very firm fashion, both at the political and institutional level, which has been done. I mean, I think there is no doubt that NATO has responded correctly. We also have to respond, of course, technologically, meaning there has to be a different type of a shield being built, anti-drone shield. I think that's very clear because these intrusions will be more and more likely in the future. I wouldn't say frequent because time will tell, but they will be more likely. Hence, in order to protect the public to start with, but also the economy from the impact of this type of uncertainty, needs better protection systems. So an anti-drone shield is of essence right now. Resources and attention has to be shifted in that direction. But you started at the philosophical level. I think at the philosophical level, we have to learn how to live with an elevated level of risk, right? It's hard because we got used to the situation in which Europe is almost risk-free. But now this is changing. And we have to also, make sure that the public understands what precautions to take, how to react to signs of suspicious behavior. We all have to be much more on alert, whether we like it or not. That's an integral part of a resilience in real life.
Have you changed something in your life?
I'm much more prudent, yes, when it comes to, all the cyber issues, definitely. I am also more agile when it comes to, observing different behavior. I think that's what we all have to practice. Of course, without, becoming, completely paranoid either, because that's exactly what our enemies want, right? They want us to live in fear. So we should not allow ourselves to move towards that state of mind, but be more on alert. We see anything suspicious around us, we need to raise alert.
So how to find this balance, if it is even possible? Because you said, and of course I 100% agree that you shouldn't become paranoid. But on the other hand, you might have political forces, governments of NATO and EU countries saying everything is okay, or this is not such a big problem. We even don't know if Russia want to do this or that. Now it's warmongering when we are saying that Russia will attack NATO or the EU country. And people may listen to it because they would like to probably come back to this sense of security. So if somebody will tell you everything will be fine, don't worry, we will deal with Russia, we can be friends with Russia. Yes, Ukraine is a bad thing. But so how to find this balance, not being paranoid, but also not being complacent?
We will have across the political spectrum people who will want to, offer 100% reassurance that everything is under control, and people who will live on the tension and exploit it. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to be, again, better prepared to distinguish one from the other, right? This points to more prominence than ever when it comes to fighting disinformation and establishing the basic ingredients of truth, because this will be a struggle that is fought at different levels and in different milieu. And there's no silver bullet solution, but raising awareness, which has been done around Europe. Sweden has an agency dedicated to this purpose, right? And other countries have also. Denmark has a ministry for resilience, which also caters for these issues. But making sure that people have the basic ingredients of distinguishing falsehood from fact becomes ever more essential in times of this type of turmoil, when it's very easy to provoke fear on a mass scale with, first of all, human consequences, but also economic consequences, right? Because we have enjoyed the fact that we belonged to the world's most stable organization, the European Union, in terms of a set of rules and norms of economic exchange. But the question now becomes how to shield oneself against the undesired impact of instability.
I don't want to talk about this, of course, but in your speech, you mentioned European Union, you mentioned the US, you mentioned China, but you haven't mentioned Russia. How much Russia, with its economy that is, and of course, this is a bit of a simplification, but how much Russia, with its economy based on selling gas or oil and now based on weapons production, fit into this war?
Russia is, first of all, a disruptor. It aims to challenge our rules and norms and our ways of doing things. Russia can also be meaningful if it sides with one of the other parties on the global chessboard. And we have seen recently a meeting of the BRICS countries where the frustrations with the US felt in India led Prime Minister Modi into the arms of President Xi and President Putin, right? So Russia can be an impactful factor, these shifting coalitions, but it's primarily to be seen as a disruptor, as a country with a fixed agenda of creating havoc and creating disruption. I don't think its fossil fuel-based economy can be of any significant challenge in strictly economic terms. But what Russia also shows is that shifting production, shifting the economy massively towards armaments is possible and does not lead to an immediate economic ruin. And that should also put us on alert with respect to what the different countries around the world may want to do.
Is the US under the leadership of President Donald Trump also at least partly a disruptor?
It's a challenger to the world that we have known before. It's not a disruptor in the strict meaning of the words. I think we should give the US, with all the criticism of President Trump's policies, the benefit of the doubt with respect to the objectives that it wants to achieve. I think President Trump is trying to address a situation domestically which he sees as unsustainable. I think he has wrongly identified the priorities. For example, bringing manufacturing back to the US is unlikely to work, and it's unlikely to translate into greater prosperity of the working class, because there are certain structural shifts in the economy which mean that advanced countries such as the United States are moving away from manufacturing just as they have moved away from agriculture in the past. And that's a fact of life. Some manufacturing will remain, but the economic prowess of the US will be based on services, on intellectual property, rather than on manufacturing. So I think the answers are not correct to the question that President Trump had posed to himself, but I would call him more a challenger than a disruptor to the global system as we speak, given that he's not turning the table upside.
Not yet.
Not yet at least. And therefore, we should put more effort and attention into understanding the underlying logic and the underlying causes.
But there is a logic, because you mentioned that we now see a less trade with the US and around the US. So somehow the world shifted from the US. I don't think this is economically good for the US. So where is the logic? And if there is logic, do you think they might correct the course, seeing this?
Yes, I think President Trump will be under pressure to course correct, and the midterm elections will provide the next opportunity for that debate to unfold. I'm not saying I share the logic. I'm saying that there is a certain logic from his point of view. And we also need to remember that, first of all, the US has never been as engaged internationally in international trade as Europe has. So it has primarily been an economy oriented towards its own internal market, which has prospered well. We have moved in the other direction in Europe, as the sources of growth internally have not been exploited as much as they should have. That's the single market agenda. We have focused more on winning external markets, right? So hence there's also that asymmetry between the US and the EU, which makes us particularly vulnerable and particularly exposed. But, if President Trump's objective is to recalibrate the US and the rest of the world, I think this will do damage to the interests of the United States. Question is, when will this be realized, and will the public draw the right conclusions, right? Because we live in complex times with a lot of different factors at play. Cultural ones are more prominent than ever. So will an economist's verdict on what has happened prevail or not? That is the question, right?
You also mentioned in your speech that China is the country that probably has the greatest leverage over the US because of the raw materials and things that are related to it. Do you think that China is willing to use this leverage, and how?
China is definitely using that leverage as we speak. Not only controlling the sale of critical raw minerals more tightly than it used to, because the standard of the past was basically free access. Well, unconstrained access. Wasn't free, but unconstrained access. Now, there are situations when China turns the tap, and it also definitely enforces greater control on the sale of critical raw minerals. We hear from Western companies that they are being very closely monitored now whenever they purchase CRMs. So there is more of economic weaponry at play here, and that advantage of China will continue for quite some time, right? Because it's not easy to catch up in this very field. Yes, we have some potential to return to mining, but this will not be very popular, and it will not be easy because the permitting process takes a long time. So we are in the hands of China for the short to medium term in terms of our dependence. And I say we to put the US and Europe under this umbrella altogether, because again, gaining a type of autonomy which would allow us to avoid crisis situations when supplies are interrupted, I think this will take a good few years, to say the least. Having said that, it's a fascinating area also of innovation where we need to put more brains at work to come up with substitutes for the CRNs, to reduce their use, to recycle. So it's potentially an area of entrepreneurial activism, which is already happening in Europe as well. It's definitely a very dynamically growing sector. It's just that the catch-up takes time. We had allowed ourselves to be exposed, like in some other areas, but in this field, to dependence on China largely, to the extent that, should not have been thinkable a few years ago, right? But
is China a disruptor?
China has a profound interest in the development of global economic collaboration for now. I think China is of sufficient size to become more self-sufficient and, again, oriented towards its own market. But the way the Chinese system is currently set up, with these massive overcapacities, with overinvestment, with overproduction, is that it is intrinsically tied to the development of a global trading system. So unless China decides to credibly change its economic model, of which we have very few signs apart from rhetorical ones at the moment, that will be the signal that something is changing and that China is building greater degree of independence from the global trading regime. But for now, it is an integral part. It is benefiting massively. Other countries, relatively few means to, apart from persuasion, to credibly stop that long-term march. So I don't expect any significant shift in the near term, because going is just too good for China.
Talking about disruption, President von der Leyen, she said about the deal we now have, even though I'm not sure how much you really have a legal binding deal, but okay, the trade deal we now have with the US, that it was the best way how to do it. And of course, she was criticized for it, but also Trump was criticized in the US. So it's not that black and white. How do you see this? And by the way, what's the best leverage the EU has over the US?
So the best leverage lies in the area of digital services and royalties that we pay to the US companies for intellectual property. So when you look at that side of the coin, we actually have a balanced relationship. We have a surplus in goods, but a deficit in services. President Trump focuses his attention exclusively on the former, meaning on the deficit in goods, not on the latter. He considers the latter to be under the risk of European protectionism, right, when we set the rules for technology and digital developments. So that's our best leverage, because we have now built a degree of reliance on American infrastructure. If you look at the cloud, especially infrastructure, we are relying on American hyperscalers, and we have governments working on Microsoft tools across Europe. So American companies are at the heart of the European economy. And so this is always a two-way street, meaning, yes, they benefit, but we also have a leverage. And we need to find a way of using that leverage.
But how? And also, of course, we now see that basically we see threats from the US that, okay, if we do something about the US companies, US digital companies, there might be even sanctions or something like that. So this is I would say, a pretty tricky situation also in terms of how we can cooperate in other areas if there will be this kind of a clash.
It is tricky, but we should speak from the position of strength, because if we, from the beginning, assume that we are prepared to accept any type of arrangement, then the conditions will not be favorable to Europe. I think that's the lesson learned from the trade deal. Of course, the question is whether the regulatory approach which Europe has pursued has much traction from now onwards. And I think we're coming to the point when we'll need to be supplemented by something else. This may have to do with a more contractual logic if we buy into President Trump's way of doing things, right? He is very much into transactional relations. So we may want to identify what it is that we want to buy and what it is that we want to sell in very crude terms. Europe is always felt anxious about doing things in this way because no, it's not market-based, it's not sufficiently transparent very often, but it is an option from now onwards that we now identified our needs and we talk in contractual terms with the US about future arrangements. But underlying all this, there is a need for Europe to build its own technological strengths.
But is it feasible? Can we still catch up?
I think it's feasible, but the choices have to be made over the costs that are associated with it, right? I mean, anything is feasible. And technological catch-up, I mean, China is a good example of catching up technologically in a short period of time. EV market is, I think, probably one of the best examples of how within a decade you can not only catch up but overtake your competitors. So this is entirely possible. The question is, now, are we prepared to make these big bets and at the risk of some of them misfiring, because that's intrinsically part of the equation here. Building a European cloud is possible, but would cost billions, right? So the question is, how do we... At the moment, Europe prioritizes defense, and this is where spending increases are sharpest. I think that's definitely the correct thing to do. This will, by the way, have a lot of also positive spillovers in other areas. The whole dual-use development means that as you grow your defense industry, you also have civilian spillovers. So this is the focus of the day. Now, will we have the resources left, so to say, for the technological catch-up remains to be seen. AI gigafactories are one of the pet projects of the European Commission as we speak. So some choices are being made, right? I'm afraid we won't be able to do everything. So what I would see emerging is more of a patchy situation in which we develop more autonomy in some fields, but then remain dependent on the US for digital infrastructure and on China for CRMs, at least in the foreseeable future.
Pavel, and one last thing. Imagine that you have a power. So what would you do as maybe a single thing, no matter if terms of economy, politics, or security, you can choose basically. What would you do towards the US? What would you do towards China? And what would you do towards Russia?
I think towards the US, I would embark on an experiment of a joint technological development project, because I think that we need to accept the fact that we are X number of years behind the US. And we also, I think, need to swallow a bit of our pride in discussions with Washington, D.C., and we also need to learn from the contractual logic that governs everything President Trump does. So this would lead me to an ambitious transatlantic economic project. AI is a perfect area for that, where we would have, again, something to offer ourselves and something to take from the US. With respect to China, I think we need to do what the Chinese did to us a few years ago, namely they borrowed massively and from our technologies. I think we need to now be ready to learn from them. So impose conditions on Chinese investments in Europe, which involve technology transfers. Again, we need to swallow our pride here, but in a different way, and accept the fact that the Chinese have surpassed Europe in some areas, not in all, but in some areas. Let's have them do business here, but with a very strict process of technology transfer so that we also benefit our way. I think with respect to Russia, there is scope for less creativity, I'm afraid, and it's only holding the line and being sturdy and not feeling tempted by any imaginary concessions. I think we just need to remain firm for as long as it takes.
This was another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. Subscribe, listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on the other platforms. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. For the link, see also the description of this episode. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.